There's a dangerous lie being told today, that history is over, that civilisations don't rise and fall anymore, that culture doesn't matter. But it does, it always has. And if we want to understand where we are now, the tensions, the violence, the fear, the denial, we have to look honestly at the long civilisational story between Islam and the West. Not emotionally, not racially, but historically. Because what we're living through isn't random, it's just the return of a cycle. Islam's rise in the 7th and 8th centuries was one of the most rapid expansions in human history. Within a century of Muhammad's death, Islamic rule stretched from Arabia across North Africa, into the Middle East and deep into Europe, including much of Spain. And this wasn't accidental. Islam fused religion, law and state into one system. It offered absolute certainty in a fractured world. And it justified expansion as both a moral duty and a divine command. And at the same time, Europe was weak, post-Roman, divided and inward-looking. Islam advanced because it was confident, unified and uncompromising, and that matters. But history didn't end there. For nearly 800 years, Europe slowly pushed back. The Reconquista from the early 8th century to 1492, it wasn't just a military campaign, it was a civilisational reawakening. Christian kingdoms reclaimed land, yes, but more importantly, they reclaimed identity. Borders were defended again. Faith was asserted, not hidden. Culture mattered. When Granada fell in 1492, Islamic political dominance in Western Europe ended. And almost at the same time, something very interesting began. The Renaissance. The Renaissance marked a profound shift in the West. Christianity didn't disappear, but it was joined by inquiry. Debate returned. Science, philosophy and art flourished. The internal tension, faith and reason, became the West's greatest strength. And from here, the divergence is undeniable. The West innovated, explored, industrialised and built institutions that could evolve. It crossed oceans, built machines, outpaced every rival technologically and economically. Meanwhile, much of the Islamic world made a different choice. Innovation was often treated as heresy. Preservation was prioritised over progress. Law remained permanently bound to a scripture written for a 7th century context. And this isn't an insult, it's just a structural reality. A civilization that can't reform its legal and moral framework eventually stagnates. And that's not racism, it's just civilizational mechanics. By the 18th and 19th centuries, these Islamic empires had almost lost momentum. The Ottoman Empire was described as the sick man of Europe. Islamic regions became dependent on Western technology, and the initiative was gone. The West dominated the world, often brutally, often wrongly, but undeniably. Islam didn't disappear, it just receded. And now comes the part that most people refuse to confront, the inversion. The West today is actively dismantling the traits that allowed it to rise. We now see civilisational self-doubt, Christianity apologised for or erased, borders treated as immoral, identity framed as dangerous. Meanwhile, Islam hasn't fundamentally changed, and it doesn't need to, because expansion no longer requires these empires and armies. It now happens through demographics, mass migration, legal accommodation, cultural guilt. Islam doesn't need to conquer a confident civilization. It only needs to enter one that no longer believes in itself. This isn't medieval warfare, it's civilizational drift. And history shows us something uncomfortable but consistent. Confident civilizations expand. Doubting civilizations retreat. Loss of identity always comes before the loss of control. The West once stopped Islamic expansion by knowing exactly who it was. The question now is simple and terrifying. Can a civilization that apologises for its own existence survive contact with one that doesn't? And that's not hatred, that is history asking a question. And whether we answer it or avoid it will decide what the next century looks like for us.